Hey, welcome back. Get comfortable, take a deep breath, prepare your mind for real discomfort because today, medieval peasants will try to survive the coldest nights in medieval history. The year is something miserable. Let's say 1243. The wind is howling. The door is barely a door. And the most advanced thermal technology available is cuddling your brother for survival. Welcome to winter in medieval Europe, where insulation is a fantasy. Private sleeping quarters are for kings and ghosts. And if your nose doesn't go numb before you fall asleep, congratulations, you died earlier that day. So how, and I mean how, did people not just freeze into historical popsicles every night? Let's start where all freezing begins. The house, or what they optimistically called a house. We're not dealing with cozy cottages here. Think more mud with a roof, and less grand designs. Most peasants lived in wattle and daub huts, which sounds charming until you realize it's sticks, smeared with mud and animal poop, dried into something vaguely wall-like. These structures were the medieval version of shrugging at the weather. They existed, but they weren't fighting for you. Now, that daub, the poop mud paste, actually does have insulating properties. When dry, it seals reasonably well, but cracks happen, rain seeps in, rats move in, the cold comes anyway, invited or not. And then there's the roof. Oh, the thatched roof. Essentially dry grass held together by superstition and spider webs. Thatched roofs are great at keeping out rain if maintained fanatically, but peasants didn't have spare time for roof raking on their calendars. If you're lucky, your thatch isn't rotting. If you're really lucky, there's not a family of hedgehogs living up there. Now let's peek inside. Medieval peasants lived in what were effectively one-room homes. There was no hallway, no guest bedroom, no separation of sleeping area and cooking area and toilet area, because they were all the same area, the floor. Picture it. Mom, dad, 3 kids, maybe a grandmother, possibly a cousin, and at least 1 chicken, all huddled together on a packed dirt surface, slightly warmed by a central fire and the crushing weight of generational poverty. Let's talk about that fire. The hearth, that open fire in the middle of the room, was the single source of light, warmth, and hope in the peasant home. It was life. It was sacred. It was also, fun fact, trying to kill you. Without proper chimneys in many homes, smoke would just fill the room and find its own way out, usually through your lungs, your eyes, or a hole in the roof. Peasants didn't mind. If you could see the fire, you weren't dead yet. Now, here's a fun little bedtime routine. Instead of putting out the fire before sleeping, they'd bank the coals, covering the embers with ash to keep them smoldering overnight. This way, you could restart the fire in the morning without matches, which didn't exist, or flint, which was a pain. But ash-banked coals are tricky. Too much ash, and it goes out. Too little, and you wake up to your house on fire. Sweet dreams. But surely, you ask, they had beds, right? Oh, sweet summer child. Yes, if you were lucky. The average peasant bed was either a pile of straw, a sack of straw, or, on extra miserable nights, just the straw. If they had an actual bed frame, say, some wood lifted off the ground, that was a luxury. Most didn't. Many slept on the floor directly on packed earth, which stayed cold no matter how many prayers you whispered into it. Straw bedding, known poetically as a mattress, was rarely changed. Why would you throw out a perfectly good pile of decomposing grass? That straw absorbed everything. Sweat, drool, lice, your secrets. You didn't lie down so much as merge with it. Let's zoom in on bedtime, circa December. Father gets in first because patriarchy and lies in the middle. He's the warmest. Then the children get placed around him like squishy insulation. Mother squeezes in on the side. If there's a baby, it goes under someone's armpit. If there's a piglet, that's going between your feet. Pigs give off a lot of body heat. Chickens tuck into corners. The goat sometimes comes inside. If you think I'm joking, know this: a goat was more useful than a blanket. People didn't sleep alone. That was weird. You'd either freeze, get murdered by bandits, or be assumed to be possessed by demons. Even monks who had solitary cells, often layered up so violently they resembled sentient laundry baskets. Now about those clothes, you didn't take them off. That would be insane. What, you think they had pajama sets? No, darling. You slept in what you wore that day, plus every additional tunic you owned, plus a cloak, plus your shame. You might wrap your feet in scraps of wool or old rags. If you had fur, rare, unless you trapped something, you wore it inside out, sleeping in it like some guilt-wrapped taco. And blankets. Maybe. More likely, another sack, or an animal hide, or a sibling. Let's not forget the wind. Doors weren't sealed, windows weren't glazed. Most homes had wooden shutters, but they warped. Gaps let in drafts, which whistled across your face at 3 a.m. like a ghost with a personal vendetta. Some people tried to hang tapestries or cloth against the walls to reduce wind chill. This was like putting a band-aid on a collapsing dam, but it gave you the illusion of trying. So how did they survive? Body heat. The answer is always body heat. They became human soup, pressed together, unmoving, radiating warmth and nightmares. To bed wasn't a phrase, it was a group activity. People got cozy not because they liked each other, but because hypothermia is an aggressive negotiator. Still they managed. Night after night, generation after generation. They didn't need memory foam. They needed each other and a really warm pig. And if you think that sounds bleak, just wait until we talk about what happened when it snowed and the roof collapsed, because of course it did. But first, are you still here? Did you hit that subscribe button? Because I'll be deeply offended if you're still watching and not subscribed. Comment if you've ever slept in a room with a goat, or wanted to. No judgment. Let's talk about ember pots, or, as I like to call them, tiny portable death traps. You see, when the fire was too far away, or when the wind turned your room into a cryogenic chamber, medieval folk got creative. Enter the bed warmer, a ceramic or metal container filled with glowing embers, slipped under the bed or even inside it, tucked carefully near your feet. The logic here is sound. The fire is too far, the bed is cold, and your toes are considering legal emancipation. Now, best case scenario, this ember pot gently radiates heat, keeps your blanket cave warm, and doesn't set your bedding on fire. Worst case scenario. Well, surprise. It's 2 a.m., the mattress is ablaze, and you've got no bucket, no plan, and no insurance. This wasn't rare. Straw beds, wool blankets, wooden floors. The only thing more flammable than a medieval bed was the confidence that this was a good idea. Even better, many of these homes didn't have chimneys. Nope, they had smoke holes. Literal holes in the roof to let the smoke out, assuming the wind wasn't blowing the wrong direction, and turning your home into a very cozy hell. You didn't build a chimney unless you were rich. Chimneys meant bricks, and bricks meant money. So for the average peasant, the heating system was start fire, let smoke rise, wait for it to escape, hope the baby doesn't choke. Now imagine this in mid-January. Wind howling through the shutters, fire smoking up the rafters, embers glowing under the bed, children burrowed into corners, the family goat watching you with judgmental eyes. And through it all, you're not even asleep. Because medieval sleep wasn't what you think. They didn't lie down at 10 p.m. and wake up at 7. That's adorable. Medieval people had segmented sleep. They would drift off for a few hours after sundown, say 8 p.m. to midnight, wake up for a couple hours, then go back to bed until dawn. That middle period, that was the watch. Not a shift, not a patrol, just awake time. People prayed, chatted, even went visiting. Yes, midnight social calls were a thing. Hey, It's Seps freezing, pitch dark, and everyone Seps vaguely depressed. Let Theps go next door and talk about pigs. That's how much they hated lying still in the cold. Of course, you didn't always wake up by choice. Sometimes the cold woke you up, or the smoke, or your sibling kicking you in the spine, or the rooster you're sleeping next to deciding that 2:47 a.m. was the right time to scream directly into your soul. So what kept them going? Faith, desperation, wool, possibly all three. Let's dive into wool. The MVP of medieval winter. Wool was warm, durable, and waterproof enough to laugh at rain. Cloaks were everything. You wore them during the day, you slept in them at night. If you didn't have a cloak, you had a problem. Some people had multiple layers: tunic, undershirt, leggings, hood, overcloak. You dressed like an onion and hoped for the best. Fun fact, they didn't just wear clothes, they stuffed them. They'd pad sleeves with rags, shove moss into shoes, even wear layers of straw under garments. Because insulation isn't just about thickness, it's about trapping heat and lowering expectations. Let's not forget fur. If you had it, you wore it. If you didn't, you envied those who did. But fur wasn't always socially acceptable. Some furs were restricted to certain classes. Sumptuary laws meant that wearing the wrong squirrel could get you fined, or, more tragically, judged. For peasants, old blankets were patched endlessly. Holes weren't fixed so much as given up on, and then ignored. You didn't buy new bedding. You inherited it, along with its lice, its fleas, and its unique scent of despair. Now, some brilliant minds had other ideas. Stone beds. That's right. In some monastic communities, and even among extremely pious lay people, there was this bright idea that suffering was holy, so they made their beds out of stone slabs, with maybe a straw mat if they were feeling indulgent. Why? Because comfort was for sinners. God wants me to shiver is an energy I do not recommend. But monks, oh, they took cold sleep to new levels. Many of them woke up for night prayers, matins, usually around 2 or 3 a.m., in the middle of winter, in unheated stone buildings, wearing sandals. Their reward? Singing psalms while slowly becoming human icicles. But don't worry, they believed it was building character. And let's not forget the nobility. You might think they had it easy. Large homes, servants, giant fireplaces. Sure, they had fire. But they also had drafty towers, open halls and windows big enough to let in 2 wolves and a regret. Even castles weren't warm. They were stone boxes. Fireplaces were luxury, but warmth didn't exactly travel well through 40-foot halls. People sat next to the hearth and still wore cloaks indoors. Whole wings of castles were essentially cold storage for people. Even nobles often slept in the same bed with family, servants, or traveling guests. Not because they had to, but because, again, hypothermia. Now let's take a small, freezing detour to medieval child rearing. Infants and toddlers were kept warm the same way everything else was. Body heat, layers, and prayer. Swaddling was key. Babies were wrapped tightly in linen strips like sad little burritos. This wasn't just to keep them warm. It was also thought to make their limbs grow straight and silent and motionless, like a blanket-wrapped scream waiting to happen. Did they sleep with the parents? Yes. Was it safe? Absolutely not. Infant mortality rates were sky high, and rolling over onto the baby was, heartbreakingly, not uncommon. And the cold didn't help. A sick child in a medieval winter home was a tragic equation. No warmth, no medicine, no options. But hey, you made it to morning, which means it's time to rise, rebuild the fire, shake the lice out of your clothes, and brace yourself for another day of toil, hunger, and trying not to get accused of witchcraft. Good morning, sunshine. Still with me? Good. That means the fire didn't get you, the pig didn't crush you, And the goat didn't eat your socks. Proud of you. Don't forget to hit that like button. Yes, I know it's weird to ask, while describing 13th century bed death. But algorithm gods demand tribute. And drop a comment below, would you survive a night in a medieval house? Or would the smoke hole finish you off by midnight? Coming up next, shared sleeping peasant bed culture, and the very specific horror of snoring beside your in-laws, while also fighting lice. Because privacy is for the future, and fleas are forever. So, you've made it through the night. You haven't been asphyxiated by embers. The wind hasn't blown the roof into next week, and your limbs still bend in roughly the right directions. Congratulations. That's the baseline for success in the Middle Ages. But now it's time to talk about who you woke up next to. And no, it wasn't romantic. It was logistical. In a world without insulation, central heating, or the concept of personal space, the bed was not a bed. It was a human survival pile. Your warmth was everyone's warmth, whether you liked them or not, and you probably didn't. Let's start with the average peasant household. It's one room, remember? Not one bedroom, one room. Kitchen, dining area, chicken enclosure, plague ward, all one happy, freezing rectangle. And when night came, it became a pile in or die scenario. The whole family slept together. Father, mother, children, infants, elderly relatives, occasional neighbor kid, probably a goat, maybe a drunk cousin who wandered in. This wasn't optional. You didn't sleep alone unless you were rich, crazy, or dead, possibly all three. And if you're thinking, oh, that must have been sweet, a cozy bonding experience, then no. You've watched too many sentimental farm movies. This was the kind of intimacy you never recover from. Imagine sharing a straw mattress or just the floor with 5 other people. No deodorant, no showers, no teeth brushing, no changing clothes. You are all fermenting. Someone coughs, someone else farts, someone's foot is in your kidney. The baby is leaking, the dog is scratching, the lice are thriving. And you can't move because the only source of warmth is not moving. Shifting position in medieval bed sharing was like playing human Jenga. One wrong move and the whole heat system collapses. Suddenly your butt's in the cold zone, and the family pig is trying to climb your thigh for warmth. Now, this wasn't just about peasants. Bed sharing was common at all levels of society. Travelers shared beds with strangers at inns. Servants slept at the foot of noble beds. Siblings grew up cheek to cheek, toe to face, breath to nostril. And yes, adults slept with their grown children, which is horrifying enough without adding in the sheer olfactory trauma. There's even documentation of servants sleeping in the same bed as their lords. Not for fun, but for efficiency. You needed to be close at hand. In case your lord woke up and needed, I don't know, a candle, a snack, or someone to blame for his gout. And this sharing didn't always end at humans. Let's revisit our cozy, moist friend, livestock. Bringing animals indoors for heat was common. And not in some cute barnyard sweet way. They were in the house, with you. Some slept under the bed, some near the fire, some on the bed. Chickens wandered. Cats hunted mice. Dogs curled up beside kids. Pigs farted in your general direction and stole your warmth. And while yes, it helped with heat, you also had to deal with the reality that your bed was also a latrine, because pigs don't care about your dignity. Now let's talk about hygiene, or rather, let's acknowledge its absence. People didn't wash up before bed. They didn't clean their feet, they didn't floss, they didn't even remove clothing. The idea of slipping into fresh linens, brushing your teeth, and lighting a lavender candle before bed would have made a medieval peasant cry with laughter, or just cry. You went to sleep dirty, sweaty, covered in the grime of the day, and you stayed that way for days, weeks. If you were lucky, months. You got a bath, maybe once a year, and only if you hadn't drowned first. You know what they did do before bed? Pick lice. With actual fingers, in actual candlelight, like deranged grooming monkeys. Lice were part of life. You had them. Your friends had them. Your blankets had them. Lice were your bedtime story, your midnight snack, and your emotional support animal. Medieval people didn't hate lice. They tolerated them. They complained about itching, but not in a "you gross" way. In a "ah yes, the price of existing" way. In fact, lice were sometimes seen as a sign of being properly pious. Monks believed the discomfort helped purify the soul. Suffering is holy was not a metaphor, it was a mattress policy. Speaking of monks, let's take a sidebar. Monks slept in dormitory-style halls. Picture a long, cold room full of straw pallets, lined up like sad tacos. There was no privacy, no curtains, no walls, just rows of quietly shivering men trying not to fart during psalms. They wore everything to bed: robes, cloaks, woolen hoods. Sometimes they even slept sitting up because lying down was considered indulgent. And if you think that sounds painful, that's because it was. That was the point. And it wasn't just religious masochism. Plenty of medieval folks believed that sleeping upright was healthier. Lying flat was thought to make your humors pool in dangerous ways. Some even feared it invited death to visit more easily, because obviously death would hesitate if you were sitting up in a weird little blanket throne. But let's go back to the peasant bed. There's a reason they never looked rested in medieval portraits. Because they weren't. They were cold, cramped, bug-bitten, crushed under their own families, and absolutely done with everything. You didn't wake up refreshed. You woke up because a rooster screamed, or a sibling peed, or your foot went numb. You got up because staying in bed was not more comfortable than the day ahead, and that should tell you everything. So why did they do it? Because they had to. Because warmth was communal. Because survival meant closeness, even if that closeness came with smells, shame, and six-legged roommates. It wasn't comfort. It was strategy. A biologically necessary mosh pit of heat and desperation. And the wildest part? They didn't even question it. This was normal. This was life. You didn't long for a better bed. You longed for a better harvest, for bread, for spring, for not coughing blood into your straw sack by February. Sleep wasn't rest. Sleep was stalling death for another night. And they got up and did it again. If you're still here, and I suspect you are because this is the kind of story that grips you like a clammy foot in the night, then you know what to do. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more historical misery, delivered with the warmth of a shared medieval blanket, and comment below. Would you rather share a bed with a medieval noble who smells like wine and incense, or a peasant who smells like onions and goat? Choose your fighter. So far, we've established that medieval people slept in the cold, in filth, under livestock, and on what can only be described as cursed hay piles. But now we must address something far darker. What did they eat before bed? And how, dear viewer, did they live with the consequences? If you think modern indigestion is bad, try it after a medieval dinner. A typical evening meal for a peasant was a pungent, fibrous avalanche of everything your body doesn't want before lying down. Think boiled cabbage, mystery beans, black bread so dense it could block a trebuchet, and salted pork that had seen things, all washed down with ale, because the water might kill you, but alcohol only made you loud. Let's pause for a second. Imagine lying in bed, after eating an entire plate of boiled root vegetables, unidentifiable legumes, and meat that's 60% salt and 40% regret. Now imagine you're wearing 4 layers of wool, sandwiched between 2 relatives, and you're not allowed to roll over. Welcome to medieval bedtime. The term for what came next is set rest. It's das fermentation. Internal, external, spiritual. Because digestion in the Middle Ages wasn't smooth. There were no enzymes, no probiotics, no gut health trends, just flatulence, bloating, and praying your spleen didn't explode. Peasants were walking pressure cookers, and nightfall was when the steam valve opened. That's right. We're talking about medieval night farts. You knew we'd get here eventually. This is history, not a perfume ad. Let's say you fire lying next to your uncle. He had extra leeks with dinner. The fire seps out. The room is sealed to keep the cold out. And then a noise emerges. Soft, menacing, philosophical. You pretend you didn't hear it, but your eyes are already watering. In the medieval world, this was known as the devil knocking. Not literally, but close. Some believed bad dreams were caused by demons sitting on your chest. Personally, I think it was just Uncle Cabbage Breath crop dusting you in a wool cocoon. But let's not pick on the peasants. Nobles weren't immune. They ate richer, which is a polite way of saying they were even gassier. Picture this: roasted meats, slathered in spicy sauces, often to cover up how rancid they were, pies filled with mystery meats, and desserts made from dried fruits, honey, and unexamined hubris. All of this topped off with flagons of wine and zero knowledge of portion control. And they didn't get tums. They got bleeding, purging, and hoping not to die. Some thought flatulence was healthy. Others believed it was dangerous. Some monks fasted to avoid bodily noises. Others just blamed Satan and moved on. One medieval medical text actually suggests eating parsley to moderate the winds, which is hilarious because parsley was only available to people who weren't poor, and if you had access to it, you probably also had a private bed and didn't have to weaponize your digestion. Speaking of medical wisdom, here sits a gem. Never sleep directly after a meal, lest your food rise and cause bad dreams. That's right. They thought food could rise up inside you and attack your brain mid-sleep like a poorly trained demon, which, considering the acid reflux they were working with, isn't even that far-fetched. But digestion wasn't the only issue. You also had parasites. And no, I don't mean the ones crawling in your blanket, I mean the ones living inside you. Intestinal worms were incredibly common. Why? Poor sanitation, undercooked meat, drinking from ponds that doubled as bathrooms. People literally shared space with their own internal hitchhikers. Night brought bloating, nausea, and in severe cases, worms exiting the body. Yes, that way. Sleep tight. Now, on to heartburn. You ever eaten 6 slices of peasant rye, a turnip stew, and 6-day-old herring and thought, wow, I need to lie down and feel my throat catch fire? They didn't call it heartburn. They called it bad humors, or spleen fire, or God's punishment for overindulgence. You weren't just digesting dinner, you were battling sin, one belch at a time. Oh, and for those poor souls who couldn't afford a second tunic, vomiting in your only outfit was a bad night and a week-long curse. But let's not ignore the psychological effects of eating this way. They didn't know about serotonin in the gut. They didn't understand nutrition, but they knew that some meals left you feeling haunted. So naturally, they turned to religion. Dreams caused by evil spirits, bad digestion, or both. That was the theory. Nightmares were not the result of stress or malnutrition. They were caused by demons entering your mouth while you slept. Sometimes through food, sometimes just because you snored with your mouth open. You could try to protect yourself with charms, crosses, or sleeping with a knife under your pillow to ward off spirits. Of course, not your brother's snoring. Now, let's talk latrines. If you had to relieve yourself in the night, after say a particularly wild lentil situation, what did you do? If you were poor, you used a chamber pot, or you went outside, or you didn't make it and had to hope no one noticed. If you were rich, you used a garderobe, a lovely little stone protrusion that let your waist fall directly into the moat. Some just held it all night. Imagine the self-control, the trust in your own intestines. Every night was a gamble, a high-stakes pressure cooker of shame and fermented beans. And remember, you're doing all of this while pressed cheek to cheek with your family in a pitch-dark room that smells like wet wood, boiled cabbage, and betrayal. Now, for bonus points. Imagine you're a woman. Sleep after a full day of grinding grain, carrying water, cooking for 10 people, possibly giving birth that morning, and you don't even get your own corner of the mattress. You sleep curled around a child, 1 foot in a pig trough, and you wake up before sunrise to do it all again. Yes, women were the real sleep warriors of the Middle Ages. And for those really lucky childbirth at night, on a straw bed with no painkillers, no medical knowledge, and a midwife whose best advice is bite on this wood and scream into the goat. But hey, at least you had dinner beforehand, salted pork and prayers. Delicious. Let's pause. If you're still watching, bless you. You're stronger than medieval digestion. Drop a comment and tell me what's the worst thing you've ever eaten before bed. If it made you hallucinate, you're officially in the club. You've eaten your cabbage. You've cursed your brother for kicking you in the shin. You've survived the ritual fart storm. And now, finally, you're asleep. Or trying to be, because the fire's out. The wind's howling. The pig is snoring. And the darkness isn't just dark. It's biblically oppressive. Welcome to the medieval night, where the cold wasn't the only thing that crept in. Medieval Europe was deeply superstitious, and the hours after sunset, that was when the veil between worlds got floppy. People believed the night belonged to spirits, not in the cute twinkly way, but in the your dead uncle is standing at the end of your bed asking about oats kind of way. They didn't have horror films. They had real life, and worse, their own imaginations. Let's start with the classic, the demon sitting on your chest. This wasn't a figure of speech. It was a widely shared belief across Europe. The phenomenon we now call sleep paralysis, waking up unable to move, feeling pressure, sometimes seeing hallucinations, was, in their eyes, a literal demonic attack. They called her the night hag, or Mara, a creature who came into your room, sat on your chest, and stole your breath. Some thought it was punishment for sins. Others thought it was caused by eating cheese too late at night. Both were terrifying. You couldn't scream, you couldn't move, and the explanation was that your brain is glitching. It was a ghost is riding your ribcage like a sadistic pony. There were regional variations too. In Scandinavian folklore, it was the mare, a spirit that caused mare riding or bad dreams. Yes, that's where nightmare comes from. In Slavic tales, Straziga or Zamora would visit sleepers, especially if they hadn't been baptized properly. Sleep tight. In England, the old hag came for those who slept on their back, a cautionary tale and a medieval sleep tip. People went to war against these things. How? With charms, herbs, crosses, and knives. Some slept with iron objects under the pillow, believed to repel spirits. Others hung garlic at the head of the bed. Because vampires and demons both hate salad ingredients, apparently. And some clutched religious relics like sleep-deprived gremlins, hoping Saint whoever had a night shift. But even with protection, fear lingered. Dreams weren't just dreams. They were omens, visitations, or prophecies. If you dreamed of water, death might be coming. If you dreamed of teeth, someone close to you was in danger. If you dreamed of anything remotely sexual, congratulations, you were now morally compromised and should probably whip yourself a few times before breakfast. People wrote down their dreams. Some even had dream interpreters. There were whole books dedicated to decoding what your brain barfed up after a meal of spoiled rye. And speaking of rye, have you heard of ergotism? Sometimes, grain would get infected with ergot, a hallucinogenic fungus. When eaten, it caused convulsions, hallucinations, and delusions, basically an accidental acid trip brought to you by medieval baking. Entire villages would fall into psychosis and call it a curse. or witchcraft, or divine punishment for that one time you milked the neighbor's cow without asking. So, if you're lying in bed, stomach full of bad bread, brain full of religious trauma, and your uncle's corpse just walked in to ask where you buried his shoes, congratulations. You're having a classic ergot dream. But the fear didn't stop with demons and food fungi. Ghosts were a real problem. If someone died improperly, without confession, without burial, or with unfinished business, it was believed they might rise and haunt the living, not in a fun who way, but in a whispering in your ear at 3 a.m. and sitting on your rafters like a sad owl way. People had rituals to prevent this. Bodies were buried with coins, herbs, or stakes. You might even bind the feet of the dead so they couldn't walk. That's how bad things were. The plan was to trip the ghost if it came back. Even more cursed, if you had a relative who died far away, their soul could return in dreams to say goodbye, or worse, ask for things. Medieval dream lore is full of ghost debt collection. Hello, I didn't dead, but could you say 5 more prayers for me? I forgot to confess theft in 1279. Mind handling that? And of course, I died in sin. Sorry, you till be haunted now. It wasn't just demons. It was the whole extended family coming back to check if you were lighting enough candles. Now, let's not forget the witches. Always blamed, always feared. If you had bad dreams, got sick in the night, or felt a sudden chill, someone probably hexed you. Night was their playground. They flew, whispered curses, summoned familiars. If you lived near a woman with too many cats and a firm personality, congratulations, you were already suspicious. To protect yourself, people kept protective symbols near the bed. Crosses, pentagrams. Yes, those were Christian ones. Dried herbs hung from rafters. Some families even drew protective runes on the beams above their bed, just in case something tried to crawl through the ceiling and into your dreams. And the best part? None of this was fringe thinking. This was mainstream belief. The church encouraged it. Priests gave advice on how to ward off night terrors. Some monks specialized in dream interpretation. The night wasn't just dark, it was morally dangerous. You weren't just going to sleep. You were risking your soul. Every creak in the wood, every chill breeze, every shadow on the wall was a potential message, warning, or attack. There was no peace after sundown, just the slow crawl of dread in a world without flashlights, therapy, or decent bedding. Still want to time travel? But despite all this, people endured. They sang before bed, told stories, whispered prayers, clutched their charms and tried to believe they'd wake up whole. They made peace with the dark, or at least negotiated with it nightly. And maybe that's the wildest part of all. They knew the darkness was full of monsters and they went to sleep anyway. If you're still with me, bless your brave, haunted heart. Comment below, what's the scariest thing that ever happened to you while half asleep? Bonus points if it involved sleep paralysis or ghostly flatulence. If you thought sleeping in the Middle Ages was rough during a normal week, let's talk about winter. Not the Instagram version. Not mulled wine and knitted socks. I stem talking about bone-cracking, sunless 4-month frost purgatory, where the only source of light is your neighbor's Sip's hut catching fire, and your motivation to get up in the morning is somewhere between 0 and might as well die. Because medieval winter didn't at play. The days were short. The nights were long. And by long, I mean endless. You could go to bed around sunset, say 4:30 p.m., and still have half the night left by the time you woke up coughing through the second sleep. And so peasants did what any reasonable mammal would do. They semi-hibernated. Not full bear mode, there was still work to be done. Animals to feed, fires to manage, but the body naturally slowed. People slept longer, moved less, and generally existed in a sluggish, half-alive state that honestly sounds kind of great. Until you remember they were doing this in filth, hunger, and spiritual despair. The science checks out, by the way. Modern research into pre-industrial sleep shows that when exposed to only natural light, human circadian rhythms adjust to longer periods of rest during winter, up to 14 hours of sleep per night. But this wasn't luxury. This was cold-induced survival mode, a physical shutdown to conserve energy, heat, and emotional bandwidth. You didn't wake up and seize the day. You woke up and thought, is it still night? Am I still breathing? Are my toes still attached? And then you went back to sleep. The first second sleep model was especially pronounced in winter. People would fall asleep early, very early, then wake sometime after midnight. During this time, they might stoke the fire, check on the animals, pray, maybe even eat a quick bite of stale something before crawling back under the pig-scented covers for round 2. Sleep as a 2-act play. Act 1. Unconscious cold survival. Intermission. Mild existential dread. Act 2. Dreaming of food you never afford. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about the mental toll. Because seasonal affective disorder isn't a modern invention. It just wasn't called that in the 1300s. Back then, it was called melancholia, or an excess of black bile. If that sounds like a Victorian cocktail, it's not. It's a debilitating psychological state that they blamed on the wrong organ. People got sad, very sad. And in winter, sadness wasn't just a mood, it was a whole vibe. You had no sunlight, no fresh food, no vitamins, no distractions, just darkness, silence, and intrusive thoughts about wolves and the mortality rate. And no, you couldn't go for a walk to clear your head. Not unless you wanted frostbite or to get lost in a foggy field and die dramatically. So people leaned into it. Depression became spiritual. Clergy wrote about the sin of sloth, not laziness, but a deep, numbing despair that made people want to do nothing. They called it acedia. And monks were especially afflicted. Imagine trying to pray 6 times a day, barefoot, hungry, surrounded by coughing old men, and realizing you're too depressed to chant. That's acedia. It was monastic burnout meets seasonal sadness, and it made winter feel like emotional treacle. There were prayers against it, sermons, accusations of sin, but no real solutions. Because what could you do? You couldn't turn on lights. You couldn't warm up the room. You couldn't eat citrus or take a vacation. You sat in the dark and tried not to collapse emotionally into the soup. Even in secular life, people changed their entire rhythms. Work slowed, markets closed earlier, tasks became minimal. If you weren't cutting wood, fixing roofs, or burying someone, your job was basically don't die. And that meant sleeping. A lot. There are reports of families sleeping in till mid-morning, taking daytime naps, and doing basically nothing once the sun set. You weren't lazy, you were cold, underfed, and operating on the energy level of a depressed ferret. So while the modern world screams about hustle culture, medieval peasants were ahead of the game. They invented slow living, not by choice, but still. And the only thing that could wake you up from your seasonal slump? Fear, wolves, thieves, disease, fire. Nothing jolts you out of melancholic slumber like the howl of something hungry outside your door, or the crackling sound of your roof giving up. And so the winter nights became a paradox. Deep sleep plus constant threat. You needed rest to survive, but also alertness to keep from dying in your sleep. You had to listen for noises, for shifting straw, for coughing that sounded too wet to be casual. Which meant that even at their most rested, no one slept well. And when spring came, the fog lifted. Not just from the fields, but from people's souls. Sunshine returned. Days lengthened. Food grew again. People re-emerged, squinting, emotionally reborn. It wasn't just seasonal. It was spiritual reset. A reminder that darkness wasn't permanent. that warmth would come again, that maybe, just maybe, this year your roof would hold out till April. Still here? Still warm? Still fascinated? So far, we've tackled the cold, the filth, the demons, the digestive betrayal. But now we need to face something even more exhausting than poor insulation. Moral expectations about how and when you were allowed to sleep. Because in the Middle Ages, sleep wasn't just sleep. It was a moral battleground. A reflection of your discipline, your piety, your work ethic, and naturally your susceptibility to Satan. Let's start with one of the 7 deadly sins, sloth. Now, modern sloth means laziness, right? You think of skipping leg day or not folding laundry for 3 business weeks. But in the medieval mindset, sloth was way worse. It wasn't just failure to do stuff. It was failure to be spiritually vigilant. Sleeping too much? Sloth. Sleeping during prayer time? Sloth. Sleeping instead of feeling guilty about your impure thoughts? Double sloth. And if you're wondering how much sleep was too much, the answer was, any sleep not connected to the grinding agony of survival. You were allowed to collapse after work. That was fine. What you weren't allowed to do was enjoy it. Didn't matter if you were tired. Didn't matter if you were freezing. If you drifted off during Mass, hell was warmed up and waiting. In monasteries, this went to the extreme. Monks followed rules known as the divine office, scheduled prayers that broke the day into chunks. Some were at night. Some were at ungodly hours, like 3 a.m. If you were caught dozing through matins, congratulations. You just made it onto the devil's LinkedIn. And they had ways of keeping you awake. Sitting on hard benches, standing through services, being publicly shamed by the abbot for nodding off. One monastery even had a wake-up monk whose entire job was to walk around poking sleepy brothers with a stick. Not kidding. A literal anti-nap enforcer. But monks weren't set of the only ones judged. Peasants were also expected to align their sleep with divine rhythms. The idea was wake at dawn, sleep after sunset, break the night with prayer. If you deviated from that, slept in, skipped early Mass, or failed to perform your nightly devotions, that wasn't just lazy. Oversleeping wasn't about health. It was about moral decay. Sleeping in. That's how the devil gets in through your ear canal. Napping in the middle of the day? That was a clear sign your soul was already decomposing. But the medieval elite? Oh, they really had opinions. Among nobles, especially in the 13th, 15th centuries, there was a rising culture of moralized leisure, which meant that even rich people weren't allowed to relax too openly. Napping was fine if you were sick, or ancient, or exhausted from diplomacy. But if you were just reclining midday, looking smug in your fur-lined robe, people talked. Whispers about decadence, gluttony. God clearly doesn't stat like a man who sleeps before dusk. Even kings were not immune. One chronicler accused a nobleman of cowardice and indolence because he was found sleeping through a battle strategy meeting. We've all zoned out in bad meetings. But apparently in the 1300s, that was grounds for questioning your entire existence. And don't get me started on church. Falling asleep in church was considered spiritually reckless. Some priests would stop mid-sermon and call out the sleeper by name. Others would have servants wake them loudly. You're trying to dream about soup, and suddenly someone's ringing a bell over your head like you owe them money. There are even medieval woodcuts showing the devil poking sleepy churchgoers with a pitchfork, suggesting that nodding off during a sermon literally opened the door to hell. Which brings us to the truly weird part. Some theologians believed that Satan could influence you more during sleep than when you were awake. That meant sleep wasn't just morally risky. It was vulnerable, a state in which your soul could be whispered to, corrupted, seduced. There were sermons that warned, if you go to bed without prayer, your dreams are invitations to sin. Yes, even your dreams were up for moral inspection, which meant dreaming about someone you weren't married to was a spiritual landmine. You couldn't control your dreams, but you could be blamed for them. It's the ultimate medieval move, judging you for stuff your subconscious made up. Let's not forget the moral superiority of early risers. It was believed that waking up early, especially before sunrise, made you closer to God, because God likes it when you suffer, apparently. Rise late? You were already spiritually suspicious. Sleep past prime the morning prayer around 6 a.m. Don't bother showing your face in heaven. There's a reason why early to bed, early to rise was seen as virtuous. It wasn't about health. It was about control, self-denial, the sacred art of not doing what your body clearly wants to do. Even yawning was suspicious. In some cultures, yawning was believed to open a portal for spirits to enter. That's why people covered their mouths. Not out of manners, but out of fear of demonic invasion. Sleep wasn't stot comfort. It was a test. Every night you lay down knowing that God, the devil, and the entire village might be watching. You couldn't win, sleep too much. You fit will lazy. Sleep too little, you stir delirious. Dream too wildly, you stir possessed. Snore? Probably unclean spirits rattling your windpipe. But in all this judgment, people still slept, because no matter how many sermons were thrown at them, the cold still bit, the days still drained, and the straw still called. Still with me? Of course you are. You're part of this twisted little bedtime cult now. Let's be clear about one thing. If you've ever complained about your mattress being a little firm, I'm going to need you to sit down, preferably not on straw, and prepare yourself emotionally. Because medieval beds were bad. Not, oh, this pillow is too flat, bad. Not springs are poking me, bad. I mean, this is an elevated sack of sticks and nightmares, bad. Let's start at the bottom of the medieval social ladder, peasant beds. Or, as they're more accurately known, whatever was soft, available, and not currently on fire. If you were a peasant, your bed might been a pile of straw in the corner, a bundle of rags on the floor, a lice colony that accidentally doubled as bedding, the warm side of a passed-out cousin. You might not even have been raised off the ground. No bed frame, no slats, no separation between your spine and the freezing dirt floor. Just straw, maybe a sackcloth, and an ongoing war with every insect in your time zone. That's not a mattress. That's the forest floor, with ideas. Now, if you were slightly better off, you might have had a trundle bed, a crude wooden frame with rope supports that sagged like your hopes. Ropes were strung across the frame, and a mattress, if you were fancy, was laid on top. This is where we get the phrase sleep tight, because you literally had to tighten the ropes every night to avoid sinking into a hammock of spinal regret. Still romantic? Oh, and mattresses, stuffed with straw, feathers if rich, moss, hay, wool, or for the very desperate, dried leaves. They weren't comfy, they were lumpy, smelly, and rarely cleaned. You didn't rotate your mattress. You prayed it didn't collapse. If you were wealthy though, really wealthy, you had a bed that was part furniture, part status symbol, part privacy theater production. Because medieval beds weren't just for sleeping, they were for showing off. Enter the four-poster bed. Thick, wooden columns, heavy curtains, elaborately carved headboards. It wasn't about comfort. It was about saying, I own this. I paid someone to carve my initials into it, and yes, I sleep like a Gothic painting. The curtains weren't just for drama either. They were functional. In the cold, drafty stone halls of noble homes and castles, the bed was its own little heat pod. You'd draw the curtains closed to trap warmth, essentially creating a human oven, fueled by your own body and seasonal depression. These curtains also created privacy, which was rare. In noble houses, you didn't have your own bedroom. You might sleep in the same room, even the same bed as families, servants, advisors, or traveling knights. You're the duke of whatever, and also sharing pillow lice with a guy named Roderick from accounting. Privacy was so rare that some people held meetings in bed. Yes, business in bed, not sexy business. Land transfer negotiations. You'd be lying down, half-dressed, and someone would walk in like, "Let vets talk about sheep taxes." No wonder everyone was angry all the time. Now, pillows. Let's get petty about pillows. Peasants? No pillows. If your neck needed support, too bad. You could roll up some rags or rest your head on your arm, but otherwise your cervical spine was freelancing. If you had a pillow, you protected it with your life. Pillows were stuffed with straw, feathers, or whatever animal hadn't escaped the stuffing process. They weren't soft. They were head bricks. But they meant something. Pillows were so closely associated with wealth and status that, in some places, commoners weren't allowed to own them. I repeat, there were laws, actual laws, limiting who could own a pillow. That's how unfair the world was. You could starve, die of exposure, be murdered by a goose, but God help you if you had an unauthorized cushion. Blankets. Same deal. If you had a wool blanket, you were doing well. If you had fur, you were either rich or a bear. Most people shared one blanket among several bodies. A noble's bed might have multiple layers: linen sheets, woolen covers, fur throws, decorative cloth. They were stacked like a heat sandwich. Peasants? One damp, suspiciously crunchy square of fabric that hadn't been washed since last harvest. And then there were bed accessories, stuff that modern you would call cute or decorative and medieval people called protection from death. Like bed hangings embroidered with prayers to keep spirits out, or herbs stuffed under the mattress to ward off bad dreams. Some folks slept with knives under their pillows, not for intruders, but for ghosts. Because when your sleep environment is that hostile, you start weaponizing your furniture. And speaking of hostility, bed bugs. They existed. They thrived. They were considered normal. No one burned the mattress. They just scratched and dealt with it. If you had bed bugs, you weren't dirty. You were alive. Now let's rewind for a second. Let's say you're a medieval noble. You have a grand bed, an ornate canopy, carved wood, heavy velvet curtains. Your servants fluff your mattress with goose feathers, or pretend to. You've got a fire nearby, tapestries on the walls to keep the chill out, maybe even a dog to warm your feet. Guess what? You fear still miserable. Because that mattress, it's uneven. The stuffing shifts. The sheets are rough. The fire only warms one side of the room, and you're probably sleeping in a room with 5 other people, one of whom is coughing blood, and the other is farting through a gout attack. Modern mattresses are ergonomic, hypoallergenic, spine-aligned miracles by comparison. Memory foam, adjustable bases, weighted blankets. Medieval people would have thought you were a wizard. You, yes you, have better sleep tech than any king before 1600. You don't have to tighten ropes before bed. You don't share your blanket with livestock. You don't wake up in fear of bed demons, ghost uncles, or being summoned to battle in your underpants. Your worst sleep night? Better than Charlemagne that's best. That SIP's not opinion. That SIP's furniture-based fact. Still here? Still smug about your mattress? So let's say it's midnight. You've had your cabbage. The fire is low. The pig has finally stopped making demonic wheezing sounds. The lice have settled in for the evening, and yet you're still awake. Your eyes are open. Your mind's racing. You're staring into the smoky void of your ceiling, wondering if that draft is from the window, or from something you don't want to name. Congratulations. You have medieval insomnia, and I regret to inform you that it's about to get deeply unhinged. Because while modern people blame stress, caffeine, blue light, or existential dread for their sleeplessness, medieval people had a slightly more chaotic menu of causes: bad humors, sin, demonic interference. Eating the wrong cheese. Standing too close to the moon. Being cursed. Looking at a woman with nice ankles sometime in 1274. Let's start with the basics. According to medieval medical theory, aka stuff Galen said, and no one questioned for 1,000 years, the body was made up of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If they got out of balance, things went sideways. Couldn't sleep, probably too much yellow bile, or not enough phlegm, or possibly your spleen was angry, and you deserved it. One doctor claimed that a dry brain and an overheated liver were primary causes of insomnia. Another said your sleep was blocked by vapors rising from undigested food. Translation: you ate like trash, and now your dreams are blocked by gas ghosts. So, how did they fix it? Let's begin with the obvious herbs. Medieval herbalists swore by plants like valerian root, known as all heal, which is confident. Poppy, yes, literal opium, just casually brewed in teas like a bedtime war crime. Lettuce, because apparently boiling lettuce and drinking the water was believed to be a calming sleep tonic. Side effect: wanting to die of boredom. If herbs didn't work, there were rituals. One 15th century sleep remedy recommends tying a bag of chamomile and motherwort to your thigh, while reciting a psalm and facing east. If that failed, you were to try drinking goat's milk stirred with a silver spoon, then rub an egg on your chest and bury it under your bed. Science? No. Desperation? Absolutely. Then there were the truly cursed cures, like this one from a 14th century folk remedy book. Take the heart of a bat, grind it with wine and apply it to the temples, because nothing says restful sleep like borrowing traits from a nocturnal sky rat. Or, my personal favorite, the French recipe that involved crushing 3 beetles, mixing them with honey, smearing it on your eyelids, and then praying you didn't go blind. Still awake? Not for long, probably. Either the potion works or the trauma does. But wait. Let's not forget the urine thing. Oh yes. Some doctors believed that drinking the urine of a calm, healthy child would rebalance your humors and restore proper rest. That's not medicine. That's a misdemeanor. And if none of these physical tricks worked, you turned to the spiritual, because everyone knew insomnia could also be caused by sin. A guilty conscience, a lie told, a lustful glance. That's why you're awake at 2 a.m., staring at the rafters while a demon licks your toes. Solution: confession. Or if the priest was asleep, whipping yourself softly while whispering Hail Marys into your goat blanket. Real thing. Some also believed insomnia was punishment for not doing your night prayers. So they doubled down: more prayers, more candles, more muttered psalms while rocking in the corner like a penitential raccoon. Others tried pilgrimage sleep charms, little cloth bags with relics, saint hair or holy dirt sewn inside. You wore it around your neck. Didn't always help you sleep, but it did make you more flammable, so there's that. And let's not forget the more socially toxic explanations. Witchcraft. If your insomnia came on suddenly, especially if you also felt anxious, itchy, or horny, it was probably a spell cast by that woman with the weird smile and the loud hens. Countermeasures: salt in the corners, iron under your bed, sleeping in a circle of garlic and St. John's wort, like you're both seasoning yourself and trying to scare off Dracula. Now let's pretend you're not a peasant. You're a noble with insomnia. What do? First, blame the servants. Second, demand a bath. Heated baths were believed to open the pores and calm the brain. Just don't fall asleep in it. Many did. Bad ending. Third, call the physician, who prescribes something absurdly expensive and ineffective, like saffron wine infused with peacock feather. If that fails, get up. Read a psalter. Write a letter. Walk the cold halls until your feet go numb and your soul forgets what rest feels like. Because one of the most common responses to insomnia, across all classes, was getting up and doing stuff. That middle of the night watch period we talked about, that wasn't just structured, it was embraced. You were expected to make use of that time. Some people prayed, some sewed, some wrote down their dreams and tried to decode them like they were haunted Sudoku. Others just stared at the fire and hoped not to die. But no one just lay there thinking this is fine. Because they knew sleep was fragile, fleeting, a gift from God, unless God was mad. And if it disappeared for too long, something was wrong with your soul, your body, or the world. Still with me? Or are you curled up trying to decide if your dry brain is overheating your liver? Let's be real. Babies are chaos. Loud, leaky, unpredictable chaos in any century. But in the Middle Ages, babies were chaos without central heating, diapers, or the expectation that they'd survive the month. So how did they sleep? Briefly, fitfully, and usually while being swaddled like a poorly wrapped burrito full of existential risk. Swaddling wasn't optional. It was a universal medieval parenting tactic. You wrapped the child tight, straitjacket style, in linen strips to keep the limbs straight, because if babies moved too much, they'd grow up crooked, which was bad for their soul and their future field plowing form. Some babies were swaddled for up to 9 months, not unwrapped, just re-swaddled, changed like a tiny, furious mummy. You were a warm bundle of future peasantry, and you stayed that way. And where did the little linen logs sleep? If you were poor, on the same straw pile as everyone else. If you were richer, in a cradle, a wooden box that rocked just enough to launch a child. If you tripped over it in the dark. There were also hanging cradles, slings suspended from beams. These were both adorable and extremely swing too hard. And it's a lawsuit energy. But no matter where the baby slept, someone always slept next to it. Infants didn't get alone time. They got breastfed in the dark, comforted by half-asleep parents, and covered by the same scratchy, louse-ridden blanket as everyone else. Co-sleeping wasn't a lifestyle. It was survival. If the baby didn't share your body heat, it froze. End of story. Of course, this led to tragedy. Infant suffocation was common. Babies rolled on. Babies crushed. Babies lost in the night. But people accepted this. Not out of cruelty, but because death was a roommate, not a visitor. And there was another fear, night-stealing creatures. Enter the world of changeling folklore, the idea that fairies or demons would swap your baby with a fake one. You'd wake up to find a look-alike child that cried constantly, didn't grow, or just felt wrong. You know, like every baby at 3 a.m. To protect against this, you left iron near the cradle. You hung charms, herbs, or garlic. You never left the baby alone, because that's when the little people struck. Some mothers went so far as to mark their child with a cross, burn a bit of hair, or whisper protective spells before bed, just in case something tried to climb in through the window and trade up. And yes, sometimes if a baby cried too much, they really believed it was no longer their child. This wasn't neglect. This was fear mixed with folklore, mixed with the crushing weight of zero education and lots of death. Nighttime routines for children were mostly feed the baby, wrap the baby, pray the baby survives the night. No stories, no lullabies. Unless you count whispered psalms with panic in your throat. No gentle white noise machines, just the sounds of fire popping, dogs scratching, someone coughing blood, and your baby making noises that sound increasingly like Latin backwards. Older children slept in the same bed, or next to the bed, sometimes with parents, sometimes stacked like luggage with other siblings. Privacy didn't exist, and neither did bedtime routines. Sleep hygiene was fall down. Stay there until someone wakes you. Try not to pee on the straw. Children were not babied. You were only coddled if you were rich. If you were poor, you were useful the second you could walk, sometimes before. You were expected to sleep wherever there was room, often next to the hearth. Sometimes in the loft under a roof that hissed wind and mice droppings. If you were cold, you didn't complain. You curled up and practiced being quiet. Because no one had time for your feelings. And sickness? There were no baby thermometers, no humidifiers, no Tylenol. If your child had a fever at night, you prayed and hoped. Maybe you called the village healer, who rubbed onion water on their feet and told you to burn a hen sip's feather and throw it over your shoulder. Did it work? No, but it felt like action. If the child died in the night, which was heartbreakingly common, you mourned quietly and moved on, because death wasn't shocking. It was built into the rhythm of life. And yet, even in the bleakness, there was care. Mothers rocked their children. Fathers shared warmth. Siblings whispered and held each other under the threadbare sheet. No one had much, but what they had, they shared. Even if the lice came too. So yes, medieval childhood was rough, but it was also tender in the way survival forces people to be tender, physical, close, and wordless. Still with me? Let's be honest. After 10 chapters of mud, smoke, livestock cuddles, and deeply cursed sleep practices, it's time for a reality check. You, yes, you, sleep in luxury, and you don't deserve it. Okay, maybe you do, but you don't appreciate it. Let's inventory your current sleeping situation, shall we? Mattress, custom support layers, pillows, ergonomic, cooling gel, hypoallergenic, probably named Cloud Whisper, temperature, controlled by a device that can literally simulate a gentle breeze from the Andes. Noise, blocked out with white noise machines, apps, and possibly a podcast of someone whispering facts about whales. Pajamas, soft, breathable, never washed in lie and shame. Lighting, adjustable, dimmable, possibly voice-activated. Threats, none, unless your neighbor's air fryer is possessed. Now picture a medieval peasant watching you lie down to sleep. They're in the corner, absolutely horrified. Not because you're naked. They've seen worse. No, they're horrified because you chose to sleep alone, with no goat, no fire, no sibling to kick you in the shin. Just silence and space and a $300 weighted blanket. They'd assume you're either a lord, a witch, or already dead. And yet, somehow, you fear still tired, still chasing sleep, still waking up groggy, still complaining about insomnia like a peasant who just got kicked by a mule and robbed of their straw. It's almost like we've taken something biologically basic and turned it into a performance sport. You see, medieval people didn't expect sleep to be magical. They didn't think it would fix their problems. They didn't spend 45 minutes choosing the right lavender spray and playlist titled Calm Moonhorse Night Tones for the Emotionally Scorched. They knew it would be uncomfortable, interrupted, possibly fatal. And they did it anyway, because they had no choice. We's made sleep optional. We bargain with it. We sacrifice it for productivity, scrolling, Netflix, anxiety. We've made it a casualty of ambition. But here's the twist. We're not better for it. We're just tired in higher definition. Sleep used to be survival. Now it's a lifestyle category, a metric, a battleground of optimization. 8 hours or bust. Track it, measure it, judge it, and despite it all, we still exhausted. Because it's not about the mattress, it's not about thread count, it's not even about blue light or circadian rhythms. It's about being human. And humans have never really known how to rest. We are creatures of worry, of guilt, of noise. We dream of demons even when the roof doesn't leak. We fear the dark even when it comes with a nightlight. We carry the same ghosts as medieval peasants. We just charge them to our therapy bills now. So, that's the point of all this? Why tell you about lice and frostbite, and monastic insomnia for 60,000 words? Because you are not alone. Not now. Not then. Not in your restless mind, your weird dreams, your 3 a.m. thoughts about everything you've ever said out loud. You're part of a long, absurd, beautiful line of people trying to get through the night. Whether you're sleeping on straw next to a goat or under a duvet with built-in cooling channels, it's still just you, your body, and the darkness. So tonight, when you go to bed, think of the monk singing matins with frost on his lips. Think of the peasant whispering prayers into the hay. Think of the noble snoring under 40 pounds of decorative guilt. And then, close your eyes. And sleep like a human being. Imperfect, haunted, but stubbornly alive. If you made it to the end of this epic, comment below and tell me what time it is, where you're watching from, and what the hell possessed you to stick around this long. You are a hero. A sleep-deprived champion of curiosity and absurdly long videos. Subscribe. Because there's more coming, more weird history, more terrible lifestyles, more stories no textbook dares to tell you. Until next time, sleep tight, but not too tight. Remember the ropes.